All right. What did Hitler think of America? Okay. All right. What did Adolf Hitler think of us? Okay, we'll start in his book, Mein Kampf, My Struggle. Chapter 2. One of the most interesting chapters in the book. All right. Hitler says, I adopted the attitude of all those who shake the dust of Europe from their feet, with the irrevocable intention of founding a new existence in the new world and conquering a new home. Released from all the old, paralyzing ideas of profession and position, environment and tradition, they snatch at every livelihood that offers itself, grasp at every sort of work, progressing step by step to the realization that honest labor, no matter of what sort, disgraces no one. I, too, was determined to leap into this new world with both feet and fight my way through. I soon learned that there was always some kind of work to be had, and so on. So, right away, Hitler, just as Hitler's an immigrant, but even from, he says he adopts the mindset of the immigrant, in particular the mindset of the immigrant who goes to America. He says that's the attitude he adopted. That's kind of how he identifies himself in his journey, first to Vienna, not even to Germany, but as an immigrant. This is how this is what he identifies. He identifies with like American immigrants, okay? And so he says, going a bit further, the peasant boy who goes to the big city, attracted by the easier nature of the work, real or imaginary, by shorter hours, but most of all by the dazzling light emanating from the metropolis, is accustomed to a certain security in the matter of livelihood. He leaves his old job only when there is at least some prospect of a new one, for there is a great lack of agricultural workers, hence the probability of any long period of unemployment is in itself small. It is a mistake to believe that the young fellow who goes to the big city is made of poorer stuff than his brother who continues to make an honest living from the peasant sod. No, on the contrary, experience shows that all those elements which emigrate consist of the healthiest and most energetic natures, rather than conversely. Yet among these emigrants, we must count not only those who go to America, but to an equal degree the young farmhand who resolves to leave his native village for the strange city. He too is prepared to face an uncertain fate. As a rule, he arrives in the big city with a certain amount of money. He has no need to lose heart on the very first day if he has the ill fortune to find no work for any length of time, and so on and so on. Okay, so he's saying that the person who, like the peasant who moves to the big city, is in a way similar. It's similar to the character of like the German immigrant to America. Okay, and so he thinks this is good. Basically, these are good people, but this is bad, and he'll go on. He says in a lot of other places where just throughout speeches and so forth, that immigration is bad, and that along with like birth control and abortion, it's things that are bad for the German race. Okay, but in general, he thinks that this is a superior kind of person. Okay, and so this is important for National Socialism in the sense that they see all people. They see like everyone comes from peasants, and Hitler will say that we all come from peasants. You know, that the peasants are like the German race, and that's there's a SS kind of philosopher named Dari who wrote a lot of these ideas, but in some ways he's not the beginning and the end. But he's it's a lot about like how they're making a new nobility from the peasants, because they want a kind of nobility, they want a kind of aristocracy, but it can't be like the old one. So this is a problem that presents itself for National Socialists. Like Hitler talks a lot about he travels to Italy, and he's hanging out with Mussolini, and he has to hang out with the royal, like the king and the nobles and the Italian court and things, and he just hates all these people, and he says they're inbred, and the women are all messed up, and the men are all, he can't even stand to be around these people. And he talks about that, he refers to this a lot. He says when he goes back to Germany, he doubled the pensions for all the social democrats who'd gotten rid of the old German monarchy, because he's so grateful and appreciative, because he could see that Mussolini and fascists and right-wingers and things, they don't know how to deal with people like that. He wasn't able to get rid of this king. You know, he didn't know how he should speak to this guy. And he says, in general, people like right-wing people like Hitler says, you know, people like himself, they're not going to know. They can't. They have trouble dealing with the church and things, where he had more respect for the way, you know, the the left-wingers would get rid of these elements, you know. So he was very grateful that they cleared these people out. But it's something that he said is they're inbred, and the inbreeding is bad with them. And so this is a different view than certain right-wing people might have, like a Catholic monarchist or something. We'd probably think that inbreeding is like a great thing, and it's the best elements. But for the German National Socialists, for Hitler, it's not good, and they need to think of ways to get the best elements out from the peasantry and make a nobility for them. And a lot of this is going to come out to like service and war and things, like all the things that the old nobility distinguished themselves as, like, you know, you become a knight by you fight in the war. But the problem is, and Hitler will speak about this a lot, different problems with nobility and monarchies and things. Like he said that a monarch or someone in the nobility, or even the woman they marry will be more feminine, like more she'll have traits that'll make the son feminine, like effeminate. So the son won't be the same sort of man of action, because he'll marry a woman who's, you know, less so, you know, where the peasant people are going to have more healthy and vigorous. So this is just what his view. It's not necessarily, you know, you don't have to go by this, but this is what Hitler thought. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but we'll come out. We'll have more quotes for you. Surely enough, we'll get these. Okay. So, but he says that the immigrant, the peasant who goes to the city is superior than the peasant who just sticks around being a peasant. Not that he thinks there's anything real wrong with being a peasant, but he's trying to, you know, the peasant's just the breeding stock of the nation or whatever. And there's good things about it, but this is like the process that they're dealing with. But he identifies with the American, okay, the American immigrant. And so what else do we got? More America stuff. We'll just go through the Mein Kampf stuff. Whatever we have here, we'll get a good idea of. What is it? Today, many European states are like pyramids stood on their heads. Their European area is absurdly small in comparison to their weight of colonies, foreign trade. We may say summit in Europe, base in the whole world. Contrasting with the American Union, which possesses its base in its own continent and touches the rest of Earth only with its summit. And from this comes the immense inner strength of this state and the weakness of most European colonial powers. Nor is England any proof to the contrary, since in consideration of the British Empire, we too easily forget the Anglo-Saxon world as such. The position of England, if only because of her linguistic and cultural bond with the American Union, can be compared to no other state in Europe. Okay, for Germany, consequently, the only possibility of carrying out a healthy territorial policy lay in the acquisition of new land in Europe itself. Colonies cannot serve this purpose unless they seem in large part suited for settlement by Europeans. But in the 19th century, such colonial territories were no longer obtainable by peaceful means. Consequently, such a colonial policy could only have been carried out by means of a hard struggle, which, however, would have been carried on to a much better purpose, not for territories outside of Europe, but for land on the home continent itself. Such a decision, okay, we'll just skip on a little bit. All alliances, therefore, should have been viewed exclusively such and such. Okay, if land was desired in Europe, it could be obtained by and large only at the expense of Russia. And this meant that the new Reich must again set itself on the march along the road of the Teutonic Knights of old, to obtain by the German sword sod for the German plow and daily bread for the nation. For such a policy, there is but one ally in Europe, England. Okay, so Hitler's looking at America. He sees, he's somewhat jealous of the position that America has, where it has all this land, it's attracting all these immigrants, all the Germanic immigrants are going there, and they've got all this land, and it's beyond, it's way better than just having some far-flung colonial thing with different colonies here and there, where you have this big base, you know, to go from. Okay. And so that's what he wants. And then he speaks right from that into the Lebensraum concept. So very much what he's trying to do at Lebensraum is make like an America. It's like an America-like project for Germany. This is, you know, he knows the world is headed in this direction. He always brings up these very large states like America, Russia, China, and that these are so huge. It's hard, you know, how do we even compete? We need to be at that level. So he's turning over ideas in his mind about how Germany could be like that. And he's thinking, if we attack East, you know, we can take all this land and we'll make like an America. The immigrants will come to us instead of to America. And he notes that, you know, he'll speak a lot about England being like America, but also different, and so on and so forth. But it's a different. There's a lot to be said there, but we'll just move on. We're building on something. Okay. What else do we have? Okay, we'll go back to another chapter in Mein Kampf. It's very interesting, notorious chapter called Nation and Race. Okay. Nation and Race. This is in Mein Kampf, infamous chapter. He brings up America very quickly, and where does he say this? He's talking about, and his views are very much based on it's race, and he's talking about race science and how certain things. His basically morality is like the best should rule and should rise to the top and things like that, and that things that are bad or sinful are things that will weaken you and will disorder this sort of thing. But he gets into like why like race, he thinks like mixing races will not be healthy, is not going to be viable for competition and things like that, and why in general it's not good, and it's why it's a losing game. But then he gets into America. So he says, no more than nature desires the mating of weaker with stronger individuals, even less does she desire the blending of a higher with a lower race. If she did, her whole work of higher breeding over perhaps hundreds of thousands of years might be ruined with one blow. Historical experience offers countless proofs of this. It shows with terrifying clarity that in every mingling of Aryan blood with that of lower peoples, the result was the end of the cultured people. North America, whose population consists in by far the largest part of Germanic elements, who mix but little with the lower colored peoples, shows a different humanity and culture from Central and South America, where the predominantly Latin immigrants often mix with the Aborigines on a large scale. By this one example, we can clearly and distinctly recognize the effect of racial mixture. The Germanic inhabitant of the American continent, who has remained racially pure and unmixed, rose to be the master of the continent. He will remain the master as long as he does not fall a victim to defilement of the blood. The result of all racial crossing is therefore, in brief, always the following. A. Lowering of the level of the higher race. B. Physical and intellectual regression, and hence the beginning of a slowly but surely progressing sickness. To bring about such a development is then nothing else but to sin against the will of the eternal Creator. And as a sin, this act is rewarded. When man attempts to rebel against the iron logic of nature, he comes into struggle with the principles to which he himself owes his existence as a man, and this attack must lead to his doom. So, the iron logic of nature. This is how Hitler thinks. Here, of course, we encounter the objection of the modern pacifist, as truly Jewish in its effrontery as it is stupid. Man's role is to overcome nature. Millions thoughtlessly parrot this Jewish nonsense and end up by really imagining that they themselves represent a kind of conqueror of nature, though in this they dispose of no other weapon than an idea, and at that such a miserable one, then if it were true, no world at all would be conceivable. But quite aside from the fact that man has never yet conquered nature in anything, but at most has caught hold of and tried to lift one or another corner of her immense, gigantic veil of eternal riddles and secrets, that in reality he invents nothing but only discovers everything, that he does not dominate nature, but has only risen on the basis of his knowledge of various laws and secrets of nature, to be lord over those living creatures who lack this knowledge. Quite aside from all this, an idea cannot overcome the preconditions for the development and being of humanity, since the idea itself depends only on man. Okay. Without human beings, there is no human idea in the world. Therefore, the idea as such is always conditioned by the presence of human beings, and hence of all the laws which created the precondition and their existence. Okay. And we can go further into that, but that's a pretty good insight into Hitler's views. So you can't rebel against nature, and man only discovers things from nature. Nothing's invented, and there's a lot to dig into right there. But this is also this tells you a lot about the view on America. And okay, we'll go on from here. He says more. Okay, he's talking about pacifism, how stupid it is. Talking about Woodrow Wilson. This and nothing else was what Wilson, the American world savior, intended, or so at least our German visionaries believed, and thereby his purpose was fulfilled. In nature, okay, blah blah blah. We really need to get into that. I don't know. We only have so much time. But it goes ideas and things, and okay, we'll just move on. What else we got in this book? Okay, maybe this is more about Jewish people. I think in another show we'll talk about Israel and the Jewish state and some of the misconceptions with Hitler's views on that. But maybe we'll touch by this in passing, just because it's kind of a nexus in the way he views America, because in some ways you would think he would think America as good, but he doesn't. But a lot of it is because of the anti-Semitism, the view of American politics is a kind of Jewish plutocracy. And it kind of mirrors what's going on in Russia, and but to him it's the same thing. It's the same kind of Jewish tricks, but it's just a different application. Okay. Anyhow, what's he talking? Oh yeah, he's talking about this chapter. He goes on. He's talking about how Jews are not nomadic. How people talk about wandering Jews, but they're not nomadic. But he says we must bear in mind that if he did not possess this technology, either he would have to avoid these territories or likewise have to struggle along as a nomad in perpetual wandering, providing that his 1,000-year-old education and habit of a settled residence did not make this seem simply unbearable to him. We must bear in mind that in the time when the American continent was being opened up, numerous Aryans fought for their livelihood as trappers, hunters, etc., and often in larger troops with wife and children always on the move, so that their existence was completely like that of nomads. But as soon as their increasing number and better implements permitted them to clear the wild soil and make a stand against the natives, more and more settlements sprang up in the land. Probably the Aryan was also first a nomad, settling in the course of time, but for that very reason he was never a Jew. No, the Jew is no nomad, for the nomad had also a definite attitude toward the concept of work, and so on. So he says a nomad goes here or there, but he's actually within a certain boundary, or so, but what he's saying is that the Jew is a parasite, and not a nomad in his view, just because of what he requires and the difference in what a nomad really is. Okay. So only so much there, but maybe we'll return to that another time. On another episode, we'll talk about. We'll get into Israel. Okay. This is just a lot more stuff about Jews, right? Okay. What else we got? Okay, hold up. If in the last decades the wealth of important inventions has increasingly... Oh, okay. Actually, where should I start with this? Before. Okay, here's where... If the talented peasant boy from his early years had likewise grown up in such an environment, his intellectual ability would be quite different. Today, perhaps, there is a single field in which origin is really less decisive than the individual's native talent, the field of art. Here, where a man cannot merely learn, but everything has to be originally innate and is only later subject to a more or less favorable development in the sense of wise encouragement of existing gifts, the money and wealth of the parents are almost irrelevant. Hence, it is here best shown that talent is not bound up with the higher walks of life, let alone with wealth. The greatest artists arise not seldom from the poorest houses, and many a poor village has later become a celebrated master. Okay, and he talks about this, this idea of, you become, from the peasant, you could be a great artist or so, in his view. This is where, say, in certain ways, you are a certain thing. Like if you are a certain thing, you are born that way. You're biologically a certain thing, but in other ways, you're not. And like with art, he says, if in the last decades, the wealth of important inventions has increased amazingly, especially in North America, it is not least because there, materially, more talents from the lowest classes find opportunity for higher education than is the case in Europe. Okay? So in America, it's more likely that you can rise up. Okay, so this is a good thing about America. Other things about America are no good. But this is what he says is to America's benefit. America has all this land, is attracting all these Germanic immigrants, and it has, like when he says he kicks the old soil from Europe from his shoes, he talks about like all the traditions, all this other, stuff he's not interested in. That's what he's kicking off his shoes. Like his, the paralyzing ideas of profession and position. He's released from all the old, and this is what America is good. He's not interested in, like, he doesn't want like the old nobility, the old roles. He has no interest in that. And he wants a system, he wants a lot of land, and he wants a system where it's somewhat egalitarian. It's somewhat, it's a land of opportunity for his race. It's partly because of, you can see how it's a personal thing for him. He comes from just being a painter, and then, there he is. So these are the ideas that kind of color this view. But what else do we have? I think we'll move on from this book. We'll get into another book that Hitler wrote called Hitler's Second Book. I don't know why he called it that, but he did. Okay. All right. Hitler's Second Book, we'll get into, what does he say? Of the Germans not united with the motherland, in consequence of the slow loss of dedicated racial comrades, the following must be regarded. That is, a total number of approximately however many million Germans find themselves in a situation which, in all human probability, will one day cause their de-Germanization. In no case, however, will they be able to take further part in the motherland's fateful struggle in any kind of decisive form. And just as little, too, in the cultural development of their folk, whatever the German element individually accomplishes in North America, it will not be reckoned to the benefit of the German folk as such, but adds to the cultural aggregate of the American Union. Here, the Germans are really only the cultural fertilizers for other folks. Indeed, in reality, the greatness of these nations is in general not seldom to be ascribed to the high percentage of German contributions and accomplishments. Okay, so what he's saying, that the Germans leave Germany, they immigrate somewhere else, but they're not expanding for Germany. This is going to be counted to Anglo-Saxon achievement. If you go to America, this isn't going to be a German achievement. It's now what the Germans are doing is now more like an English achievement. It's more Anglo-Saxon. It's lost. Okay. For Germany, it doesn't work like this. Yeah, since the German folk does not consist of Jews, the German element, especially in Anglo-Saxon countries, nevertheless and unfortunately, will increasingly be anglicized and presumably likewise be lost to our folk, spiritually and ideologically as well, just as in practical work, accomplishments are already lost to them. Okay. So Hitler, I don't know if it's when he first met Americans, but one of the first times he did meet Americans was in World War I, when his unit first got in a clash with an American unit. Afterwards, he had to deal with some POWs, and so he noticed that these guys were they're very strong, but also they're healthy, but also they spoke German. So these are American troops, but they still spoke German at the time in World War I, or according to the story that he told. But he it occurred to him that this is how they're losing guys through immigration. So this really colored his view that's how they're losing people, and America is gaining their people. Okay. Something. Something. I think maybe to go back to Mein Kampf a little bit, something interesting. Hitler does his views on basically everything. He contrasts America with Japan. Japan, he says, is a culture bearing race. It can improve. He says it basically. So maybe they could improve on something existing even, but they can't just create something totally. And it's because of, in his view, everything is about the Aryan race. Okay. He says, it is idle to argue which race or races were the original representative of human culture, and hence the real founders of all that we sum up under the word humanity. It is simpler to raise the question with regard to the present, and here an easy, clear answer results. All the human culture, all the results of art, science, and technology that we see before us today are almost exclusively the creative product of the Aryan. This very fact admits of the not unfounded inference that he alone was the founder of all higher humanity, therefore representing the prototype of all that we understand by the word man. He is the Prometheus of mankind, from whose bright forehead the divine spark of genius has sprung at all times, forever kindling anew that fire of knowledge which illumined the night of silent mysteries, and thus caused man to climb the path of mastery over the other beings of this earth. Exclude him, and perhaps after a few thousand years darkness will again descend on the earth. Human culture will pass, and the world will turn to a desert. Okay, so that's Hitler's view. So he talks about Japan, he talks about, like, after 1,000 years, okay. Often in a few millenniums or even centuries. Wait. Hitler says, approximately the following picture of their development always results. He's talking about Japan. He goes into this. Aryan race is often absurdly small numerically, subject foreign peoples, and then, stimulated by the special living conditions of the new territory, fertility, climatic conditions, etc., and assisted by the multitude of lower type beings standing at their disposal as helpers, develop the intellectual and organizational capacities dormant within them. Often in a few millenniums or even centuries, they create cultures which originally bear all the inner characteristics of their nature, adapted to the above indicated special qualities of the soil and subjected beings. In the end, however, the conquerors transgress against the principle of blood purity, to which they had first adhered. They begin to mix with the subjugated inhabitants and thus end their own existence. For the fall of man in paradise has always been followed by his expulsion. After 1,000 years and more, the last visible trace of the former master people is often seen in the lighter skin color which its blood left behind in the subjugated race, and in a petrified culture which it had originally created. For once the actual and spiritual conqueror lost himself in the blood of the subjected people, the fuel for the torch of human progress was lost. Just as, through the blood of the former masters, the color preserved a feeble gleam in their memory, likewise the night of cultural life is gently illumined by the remaining creations of the former light-bringers. They shine through all the returned barbarism, and too often inspire the thoughtless observer of the moment with the opinion that he beholds the picture of the present people before him, whereas he is only gazing into the mirror of the past. Okay. So, he's saying, I mean, keep in mind, a lot of the Anna expeditions and such were just trying to prove Hitler correct from Mein Kampf. The things that he said they're saying were correct. They would go to Tibet or whatever, and they're looking for where the Aryan was, where the white man was, where the Nordic, the actual culture creator had been, because they don't believe that other peoples can create like civilization. It's only the Aryan creates, and then after a while he mixes in with the native population and is mixed away after however long. Okay, so that's a little digression, but this will help put a little light on the subject. Okay, but go back to America. Hitler on the American Union. So he taught Hitler's second book. He talks a lot about America, as he's kind of talking about the foreign policy and a future foreign policy, and he sees America as a another competitor that will, Germany will have to fight in the future. There'll be like a super Germany in the future, and he only wrote this so many years after Mein Kampf, but he's thinking way ahead. He never put it out because, why? But he's saying that at some point, the Greater Germany will be in a conflict with America. America, almost like a kind of doppelganger that had taken however many German immigrants. Okay, but here we go. Hitler says, the result of following these councils, especially for Germany, will be of the most fateful importance. Germany is racially composed of so many unequal constituent elements that a permanent emigration perforce will remove from our nation people who have the greatest capacity for resistance, who are the boldest and most determined. These, above all, like the Vikings of yore, will also today be the bearers of Nordic blood. The slow diminution of the Nordic elements leads to a lowering of our general race value, and thus to a weakening of our technical, cultural, and also civic, political, productive forces. Hence, the consequence of this weakening will be especially grievous for the future, because there now appears as a dynamic actor in world history a new state which, as a truly European colony, has for centuries received the best Nordic forces of Europe by way of emigration. Aided by the community of their original blood, these have built a new, fresh community of the highest racial value. It is no accident that the American Union is the state in which, at the present time, most inventions are being made by far, some of which are of an incredible boldness. Americans, as a young, racially select folk, confront old Europe, which has continually lost much of its best blood through war and emigration. Just as little as one can equate the accomplishment of 1,000 degenerate Levantines in Europe, say in Crete, with the accomplishment of 1,000 racially still more valuable Germans or Englishmen, so can one just as little equate the accomplishment of 1,000 racially questionable Europeans to the capacity of 1,000 racially highly valuable Americans. Only a conscious folkish race policy would be able to save European nations from losing the value of action to America, of losing the law of action to America. In consequence of the inferior value of European folks vis-a-vis the American folk. If in place of this, however, the German folk, along with the bastardization systematically conducted by Jews with inferior human material and a lowering of its racial value, as such cause thereby, also lets its best blood-bearers be taken away by continuation of emigration in hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of individual specimens, it will slowly sink to the level of an equally inferior race, and hence that of an incompetent and valueless folk. Okay. The danger is especially great since, because of the complete indifference on our side, the American Union itself, inspired by the teachings of its own ethnologists, has established special standards for immigration. By making entry to American soil dependent on definite racial prerequisites on the one hand, as well as on the definite physical health of the individual as such, bleeding Europe of its best people has indeed perforce been legally regulated. This is something which our whole so-called national bourgeois world and all its economic politicians either do not see or at least will not hear of, because it is unpleasant to them, and because it is much cheaper to pass over things with a couple general national phrases. So he's saying the situation is bad for Europe, because America is taking the best elements. This is why he identifies as an American immigrant or something. He's saying, in a way, he's one of the best people. He's in Germany, however many, Viking types have already immigrated to America, but he's of this type, but not going. And, he's staying in Germany, but he's obviously, he's one of the best, but he's trying to cultivate the best people who they still have, because America's taking, selectively taking the best people, and it's strange how other, or maybe they do, I don't know, but other nations don't, still comment on America like this. And a lot of why I thought this would be a fun show would just be so Americans, we can view. It's fun to view our own country through foreign eyes and things, and get new perspectives on things. And sometimes that can show, maybe things you never thought about. But I mean, foreign countries you would think would be even now, where people talk about merit-based immigration, that is, it's causing all that brain drain or whatever on their own countries. But Heller sees this as almost malicious, in the way his country doesn't seem to care, and America is just getting all their best people. And and also he says that there's actually a lot of real problems with the racial situation within Europe itself. So, to this lowering imposed by nature of the general value of our folk by forced immigration and consequence of our national policy is added birth control as a second disadvantage. I have already set forth the consequences of the fight against the child. The alliance. So he goes into a lot of this, how he sees the German situation at the time very dysgenic, and the best people are on birth control, and the worst people, and or are immigrating and so forth. Okay. So then our folk moves toward a permanent pauperization of personality values, and thereby to a lowering of its whole cultural and spiritual importance. Okay, if this condition should continue for just several hundred years, our German folk would be, at the least, so weakened in its general importance that it would no longer be able to raise any kind of claim to be called a folk of world consequence. In any case, it will no longer be in a position to keep pace with the deeds of the considerably younger, healthier American folk. Then, because of a great number of causes, we ourselves will experience what not a few old cultural folks prove in their historical development. Through their vices and in consequence of their thoughtlessness, the Nordic blood-bearer was slowly eliminated as the most racially valuable element of the bearers of culture and founders of states, and thereby they left behind a human hodgepodge of slight intrinsic importance that the law of action was wrested from their hands to pass over to other younger and healthier folks. So he's saying the Germany could just be some dead backwater civilization. The law of action, is wrested from their hands, and, America's the new, okay. Thus, just as here, history was slowly shaped by the racially more valuable folks of the Occident, the danger likewise arises that the importance of racially inferior Europe slowly is leading to a new determination of the world's fate by the folk of the North American continent. So it's very doom and gloom types. I mean, he just refers to Europe as racially inferior Europe. All right, that this danger threatens all Europe has, after all, already been perceived by some today. Only a few of them wish to understand what it means for Germany. Our folk, if it lives with the same political thoughtlessness in the future as in the past, will have to renounce its claim to a world importance once and for all. Racially, it will increasingly atrophy until it finally sinks to degenerate, animal-like feed bags, lacking as well the memory of past greatness. As a state in the future order of world states, they will at best be like that which Switzerland and Holland have been in Europe up to now. So they could end up like that at best. Okay. This will be the end of the life of a folk whose history has been 2,000 years of world history. So has this happened? There. So he gets into a lot of this. He goes into a lot of why he doesn't want a pan-European movement. He's not really for that. He goes into why that would be a big problem, why there's no real value in a pan-European movement. I think there's more interest in that today, but at the time he saw a path to avoid that. There would just be a greater Germany. You would just make Germany huge, like to the level of America. He specifically says he doesn't want a pan-European thing, and he is against that kind of thing. As much as now it's popular to portray like Germany, the struggle against Bolshevism, the crusade against Bolshevism, like a pan-European crusade with all the European nations. That's not really Hitler's dream. Okay. Okay. If this were not correct, if the importance of American Union thus lay in the size of the population alone, or else in the size of territory, or in the relation in which this territory stands to the size of population, then Russia would be at least as dangerous for Europe. So this is why America is more dangerous than Europe. Present-day Russia encompasses however many million people on however many million square kilometers. These people are also comprised in a state structure whose value taken traditionally would have to be even higher than that of the American Union. Despite this, however, it would never occur to anybody to fear a Russian hegemony over the world for this reason. No such inner value is attached to the number of the Russian people, so that this number could become a danger for the freedom of the world. At least never in the sense of an economic and power political rule of the other parts of the globe, but at best in the sense of an inundation of diseased bacilli, which at the moment have their focus in Russia. So America has the more quality people. You can't compare it to Russia. I mean, he says basically you couldn't compare what 100 million Americans do with 1,000 million Russians, because the Russian isn't the same kind of person. The American, he says, is like the highest kind of Nordic. Is like the Viking. Is like the type who sets out to conquer and create. And so, America's attracted all the best Nordic, Germanic Europeans, and this doesn't exist in Russia or something. There's nothing like that. Okay. So then he goes further into the pan-European movement, the basic error of the pan-European movement, even the idea of why this is just fantastic, ridiculous, and so on. But even in such a case, the desired success would not materialize. For once, any European great power today, and naturally it could involve only a power which is valuable according to its folkdom, that is, racially important, brings Europe to unity along these lines. The final completion of this unity would signify the racial submersion of its founders, and thereby remove even the last value from the whole structure. It would never be possible thereby to create a structure which could bear up against the American Union. So it would not, you can't compete against America with a pan-European movement. He's saying this has to be, he always refers to he refers to the U.S. as the American Union, but he'll talk about a German Union as being like, that would, there needs to be like a greater Germany or something, not a like a collection of European states isn't going to do it. Okay. Really, there is no need to refute the opinion that just because a fusion of folks of different nationalities has taken place in the American Union, this must also be possible in Europe. The American Union, to be sure, has brought people of different nationalities together into a young nation, but closer scrutiny discloses that the overwhelming majority of these different ethnic groups racially belong to similar or at least related basic elements. For since the emigration process in Europe was a selection of the fittest, this fitness in all European folks lying primarily in the Nordic admixture. The American Union, in fact, has drawn to itself the scattered Nordic elements from among folks who were very different as such. If in addition we take into account that it involved people who were not the bearers of any kind of theory of government and consequently were not burdened by any kind of tradition, and further the dimension of the impact of the New World to which all people are more or less subject, it becomes understandable why a new nation made up of peoples from all European countries could arise in less than 200 years. So, okay, we'll read on. It must be considered, however, that already in the last century, this fusion process became more difficult in proportion as under the pressure of need, Europeans went to North America, who as members of European national states not only felt themselves united with them folkishly for the future, but who particularly prized their national tradition more highly than citizenship in their new homeland. Moreover, even the American Union has not been able to fuse people of alien blood who are stamped with their own national feeling or race instinct. The American Union's power of assimilation has failed vis-a-vis the Chinese as well as vis-a-vis the Japanese element. They also sense this well and know it, and therefore they would best prefer to exclude these alien bodies from immigration. But thereby, American immigration policy itself confirms that the earlier fusion presupposed peoples of definite equal race foundations and immediately miscarried as soon as it involved people who were fundamentally different. That the American Union itself feels itself to be a Nordic German state and in no way an international mishmash of folks further emerges from the manner in which it allots immigration quotas to European nations. Scandinavians, that is, Swedes, Norwegians, further Danes, then Englishmen, and finally Germans, are allotted to the greatest contingents. Romanians and Slavs, very little. Japanese and Chinese they would prefer to exclude altogether. Consequently, it is a utopia to oppose a European coalition or pan-Europe consisting of Mongols, Slavs, Germans, Latins, and so on, in which all others than Teutons would dominate as a factor capable of resistance to this racially dominant Nordic state. A very dangerous utopia, to be sure, if we consider that, again, countless Germans see a rosy future for which, they will not have to make the most grievous sacrifices. Okay. So, you see, it's one people. He sees Americans have one united people, basically. And it's a Nordic Germanic people, not a mishmash, but it's a racial. He sees America as racial power and as a good geographical situation that he's clearly envious from. But also a lot of it is just that Americans aren't this inbred kind of people. It's people who are from all over in Europe, but are selected to be better and who can actually form into a coherent people, a primarily Nordic people. Okay, if England herself remains true to her great world political aims, her potential opponents will be France and Europe in the future, especially the American Union in the future. So, he wants England to unite with Germany against America, and he sees this could be possible, although there's how many problems to it. Okay, I think we're almost done with Hitler's second book. Okay. What's he say? This is possible only if the coalition of victors itself quarrels over this question, but never, however, in an alliance with Russia, let alone in the... Then in the far future, it may be possible to think of a new association of nations consisting of individual states with a high national value, which could then stand up to the threatening overwhelming of the world by the American Union. For it seems to me that the existence of English world rule inflicts less hardships on present-day nations than the emergence of the American rule. Okay. So it is, pan-Europe cannot be summoned to the solution of this problem, but only a Europe with free and independent national states whose areas of interest are divergent and precisely delimited, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so he does need some allies. He would like England. All right, we'll move on. We'll be done with Hitler's second book. So you see some of what his views of America are based on. Let's see what else we got. What else do we have? America. So what are we looking for here? Okay. Oh wait, maybe over here. Well, I don't know. Okay. I'll just skip along to their misfortune to think that there are millions of unemployed in America. What they should do is embark on a revolutionary new economic policy, abandon the gold standard, and further increase the needs of their own home market. Germany is the only country that has no unemployment, and so... Okay, oh, here we go. The peasant is the being least of all accessible to ideologies. If I offer him land in Russia, a river of human beings will rush there headlong. For a man of the soil, the finest country is the one that yields the finest crops. In 20 years' time, European immigration will no longer be directed towards America, but eastwards. The Black Sea will be for us a sea whose wealth our fishermen will never exhaust. Thanks to the cultivation of the soya bean, will increase our livestock. So this would be very soy or whatever. We'll win from that soil several times as much as the Ukrainian peasant is winning at present. We'll be freed from the worry of having to seek outlets for our own goods in the Far East. For our market is in Russia, we must make sure to market. So he says, 2/3 of American engineers are German. Okay. During our centuries of life under particular conditions, a great number of our compatriots were thrust back in upon themselves, and although they had the souls of leaders, they vegetated. When we can offer a great task to such men, we'll be surprised to discover their immense qualities. For the next centuries, we'll have at our disposal an unequaled field of action. So he sees this is just opening up all the possibilities for Germany, where they have this, when they have the Lebensraum opened up, they're going to get all the immigrants. Immigrants won't be headed to America. It's like Hitler says. He said that people weren't going to America because they had some idea. They liked the kind of government or something. It had nothing to do with that. And it's just the material conditions are favorable, and it's just an attractive project in general. But to him, it's a more racial project. The politics of it mean very little. Okay. What else we got? Okay. England and America have now decided to produce synthetic rubber. Okay, blah, blah, blah. At this moment, states have a lot of difficulty to overcome. Might be possible to negotiate a separate peace which would leave India to England. In that case, what would happen to the United States? They would be territorially intact, but one day England will be obliged to make approaches to the continent, and it will be a German-British army that will chase the Americans from Iceland. I don't see much future for the Americans. In my view, it's a decayed country, and they have their racial problems, and their problem of social inequalities. Those were what caused the downfall of Rome. And yet Rome was a solid edifice that stood for something. Moreover, the Romans were inspired by great ideas. Nothing of the sort in England today. As for the Americans, that kind of thing is non-existent. That's why, in spite of everything, I like the Englishman 1,000 times better than an American. It goes without saying that we have no affinities with the Japanese. They're too foreign to us, by their way of living, by their culture, but my feelings against Americanism are feelings of hatred and deep repugnance. I find myself more akin to any European country, no matter which. Everything about the behavior of American society reveals that it is half Judaized and the other half negrified. How can one expect a state like that to hold together? A state where 80% of the revenue is drained away for the public purse. A country where everything is built on the dollar. From this point of view, I consider the British state very much superior. Okay, and this is said on the 7th of January, 1942. So it's not long after Pearl Harbor and the entrance of America into World War II, but Hitler's view on Americans is definitely at a low when he makes his statement, and he seems to be getting pretty pumped up for the war with America, which had come earlier than he anticipated, but he did anticipate that it would come. So that's what he says. Those are harsher words for America than other things, but he says that, but he's always had something of a view to America like this, but it's something to, he sees a good racial stock, but it's employed, by what he views as an evil cause. It's clearly an evil society in his view. The dollar rules. It's pure materialism and all these other things that he does not care for. Okay. What else we got? There's a lot, but there's only so much we can really go over. And according to here he talks. This is 1942, August 1942. It says, conversation turned to a book entitled Juan in America, which Bormann had recently lent to the Fuhrer. In it, the author paints a picture of the unbelievable conditions which reigned in the intellectual and political circles of the United States, and of the astonishing credulity of the American citizen. Hevell states that this credulity was not an exclusively American characteristic, and that in Britain, too, the people swallowed everything they were told. Hitler said, he goes on. You don't need to read all this. But yeah, he says, one in America. But he says he gets to it. According to the Americans themselves, America is the finest, biggest, and most efficient of everything in the world. And one then reads a book like this about them, one sees that they have the brains of a hen. Well, the disillusionment will be all the more severe, and the consternation when this house of cards collapses will be enormous. This has already occurred as far as the Far East is concerned. Why should a people of that sort fight? They've got everything they want. Anyway, the ardor for battle will soon wane when the individual finds himself called upon to endure further curtailment of the amenities of life. It is very difficult to argue with Americans. They immediately shout, say, take a look at what our workers earn. True, but let us take a look at the shady side as well. The industrial worker earns his $80, but the man who is not in industry gets absolutely nothing. At one time, they had no less than 13 million unemployed. I have seen pictures of shelters built out of old kerosene tins, which the unemployed had erected for themselves, and which remind me of the holes of misery to be found in the Bolshevik industrial cities. I grant you that our standard of life is lower, but the German Reich has 270 opera houses, a standard of cultural existence of which they over there have no conception. They have clothes, food, cars, and a badly constructed house, but with a refrigerator. This sort of thing does not impress us. I might, with as much reason, judge the cultural level of the 16th century by the appearance of the water closets of the time, an apartment which was not then regarded as of particular importance. Okay. A few days ago, I read another book about Spain. Spaniards and Americans simply cannot understand each other. Those things which the Spaniard venerates most highly mean nothing to the American. To the Spaniard, the American way of life is a closed book. To sum it up, the Americans live like sows and a most luxurious style. And this comes up a lot, that Americans have a kind of standard of living that Germans can't compete with. And this is one of the explanations for why, for instance, Hitler does not think very well of Americans as soldiers, fighters, and even where when the war is kind of going against Germany, he doesn't necessarily oh dang. Oh yeah, okay. What did he say? Going back further, 1940, 42. This is the earliest. But he's saying that Americans have such a high quality of living that he doesn't see them being like some badass. They're not going to really, it doesn't mean they're going to fight, even though they have all these inventions, they have a high quality of life. He says, General Gauss declared, it was a relief for us to learn of Japan's entry into the war. This is 5th of January. It says 1941. That's got to be a typo. This must be in 1942. Okay. Yes, a relief, an immense relief, but it was also a turning point in history. It means the loss of a whole continent, and one must regret it, for it's the white race which is the loser. In 1940, the English told us that the flying fortresses would pulverize Germany. They told the Japanese that Tokyo would be razed to the ground within 9 hours. On the basis of these boastings, we were entitled to suppose that during 1941, they had multiplied their efforts in the field of air warfare. To cope with this possibility, I had our flak reinforced, and above all, I had enormous reserves of ammunition built up. In actual fact, during 1941, we used only 1/4 of the ammunition used the previous year. I believe that if we can get through to Rommel enough petrol, tanks, and anti-tank guns, the English will have to dig in on the defensive, and we shall again have the chance of getting them on the run. Just about now, Rommel should be receiving 200 tanks. I'll never believe that an American soldier can fight like a hero. That's what he says. But these predictions turned out to be somewhat disastrous. Obviously, Germany was bombed to rubble throughout the course of the war. But it's something that with Russia, the people of the East, with all the Slavs, even Poles, towards the end of the war, Hitler would start to say different things. He'd say, okay, these people have proven stronger, and things like that. He has to explain that we're being beat. With the Americans, for whatever reason, he never really comes around to that. Even in Albert Speer's book, he talks about Speer talks about during the Battle of the Bulge, where he says what's he saying? He finds Sepp Dietrich. Late that evening, I visited Sepp Dietrich, a former sergeant in the old German army. This is Albert Speer talking. Now commander of an SS armored force. He had set up, which is like the 6th Panzer Army at the time. He had set up a headquarters in the vicinity of the Belgian border town of Houffalize, one of the few old fighters of the early days of the party. In his own plain fashion, he too had parted ways psychologically with Hitler. Our conversation soon turned to the latest batch of commands. Hitler had decreed with increasing insistence that encircled Bastogne be taken at any cost. He refused to understand, Sepp Dietrich grumbled, that even the elite divisions of the SS could not effortlessly overrun the Americans. It was impossible to convince Hitler that these were tough opponents, soldiers as good as our own men. Besides, he added, we were receiving no ammunition. The supply routes have been cut by their air attacks. Okay, as if to illustrate our helplessness, our nocturnal talk was interrupted by a low-level attack from huge 4-motored bomber formations. Howling and exploding bombs, clouds illuminated in red and yellow hues, droning motors, and no defense anywhere. I was stunned by the scene of military impotence, which Hitler's military miscalculations had given such a grotesque setting. So, in many ways, where Hitler was inspired by America and jealously tried to create something similar, he also miscalculated strangely in ways where he looked down and could never. He was always confused that Americans actually could fight, or where Sepp Dietrich is saying he can't just effortlessly plow over these American units. It's actually, this is a tough opponent, but Hitler won't hear it. Even with all the other it's kind of a contradiction of sorts in his views, but you could call it a nuance, but it just seems incorrect. In that he's saying this is, you would look at this, say, hey, this might be a superior Nordic. They're getting the superior Nordic blood, and then he's confused when his troops can't just plow right over an American unit in battle. So something's going on there. Okay. What else do we have? Do we already? Oh, okay. Hitler says, in August 1942, our country today is overpopulated, and the numbers emigrating to America are incredible. I don't know if that was still happening, but he says, "How I wish we had the German Americans with us still. Insofar as there are any decent people in America, they're all of German origin." So all decent people in America are of German origin, but Hitler wishes he had them still. So there's all these other cases, like he'd said about the American engineers. He says 2/3 of them are German. So these are all the good qualities of America. Is the Germans. He wishes he had the German Americans with the still. But what else we have? Hitler says the only romance which stirs the heart of the North American is that of the Redskin, but it's curious to note that the writer who has produced the most vivid Redskin romances is a German. One thing the Americans have and which we lack is the sense of the vast open spaces, hence the particular characteristics of our own form of nostalgia. There comes a time when this desire for expansion can no longer be contained and must burst into action. It is an irrefutable fact that the Dutch, for example, who occupied the most densely populated portions of the German lands, were driven centuries ago by this irresistible desire for expansion to seek ever wider conquest abroad. Okay, so he says this in 1943. Okay, in June of 1943. So it goes into this. A lot of the stuff he'll use the same kind of language, like the sense of vast open spaces. He says the Americans have this sense of vast open spaces. When he talks about Germans trying to conquer Russia, he says we lack this sense of vast open spaces. He'll always say that. Or earlier, I read where he said, America would crumble like a house of cards. Is the same he expected for the Soviet Union. Of course, it could be he prepares that these are like Jewish slave states or something of some kind, like the American plutocracy, and then the Russian Bolshevism. They'd both crumble like house of cards upon impact with the Wehrmacht. But this is not what happened. But we see, I don't know, like he doesn't really come around to liking Americans. He actually seems to like Slavs more as he goes along in the war. The more he's losing the war to Slavs, the more he likes them. But it's not the same with America. He seems like he started out liking America, but then the more the war goes on, he just hates America and he disdains America, and only giving so much explanation, but I don't know. Okay. But I think that's enough food for thought. I know this isn't necessarily a completely. I'm not trying to make a whole thesis with this stuff. We're just talking about what Hitler said and his actual words that are apparently his views on this, and then you could take from that what you will. But it can be more interesting than the picture that might have been painted for you, or the assumptions that sometimes we have going in for this sort of thing. Yeah, take that as you will. I hope this was interesting. Thank you for listening. All right.